Hello everybody, welcome back. Happy Tuesday. So on Tuesdays on my channel, I cover like baking hacks or tips or kind of like things like that. And today I'm going to teach you 10 tips to bake your perfect cake. So I make a ton of cakes on this channel and I realized that I haven't gone into little details that maybe I think of when I'm baking the cake, but that aren't necessarily included in the recipe. So I thought that I would tell you guys those little tips today, and these are perfect for beginners if you're a beginner making a cake, or maybe you're super talented at making cakes and you just haven't heard of some of these. I don't know, but anyways, I thought this would be fun. Also, before I get started, I wanted to let you guys know that I've opened a little members only Facebook page for my core bunnies, as I'm going to call you guys, and it's actually through Patreon. Through that Facebook page, you'll be able to vote on what recipes actually make it to this channel, so you'll have a say in how this channel actually gets developed, as well as future flavors for Etsy, and you'll also get priority on ordering the flavors on Etsy, or the chocolates that I sell on Etsy. So if you want to go check that out, I'll have a link here for you guys, and yeah, let's get started. So tip number one is to always follow the recipe to the T, unless you are very familiar with the recipe or you know what's going to happen chemically if you substitute an ingredient for an ingredient in the recipe. Cooking, you can do that and it usually works out pretty fine, but baking is a science, and the amount of eggs, if you omit an egg, it'll definitely change the way that your cake rises and stuff like that. So if you're new to baking and you want to bake a cake but you're missing an ingredient, go out and buy the ingredient. Don't just try to make it and hope it'll work out, because with baking you won't, it's a little bit trickier and it's much more of a science than cooking. Tip number two is not to overmix the flour in your cake mixture. So once you add the flour, usually, unless the recipe states otherwise, mix it until you can just see that it's just incorporated. If you mix the flour too much, it's going to develop the flour and it'll make it a lot tougher, and it'll make the end result a lot tougher as well and won't be as light and fluffy. So keep an eye when you're mixing the flour, just to mix it until you can't see any little flour bits hanging around in your dough. You also want to make sure that the ingredients are at the right temperature. Baking is that finicky, oh my gosh. So with butter especially, you usually want it to be, unless stated in the recipe, room temperature butter, because you have to beat and whip the butter, and just don't put yourself through the pain of trying to whip cold butter from the fridge. It won't happen. It's not, just, oh my god, don't. I've tried it, it's not fun at all. If you guys saw my kitchen tour, you'll see that I have a little corner where I keep my unsalted butter at room temperature, just because I'm baking all the time, so that it's always nice and soft and easy to whip. Also with eggs, ideally you want them to be room temperature, although in a recent live event that I did on Instagram, I told you guys that I never really do that, and I always use cold eggs. So do as I say, not as I do. The risk with using cold eggs when the rest of your mixture is room temperature is that the cold temperature from the eggs can make your mixture curdle. It'll make the unsalted butter firm up because of the cold temperature that you're introducing to the room temperature batter. So if you want it to be absolutely perfect when you are making your cake batter, just set your eggs at room temperature, maybe half an hour before you start baking, and you'll be completely fine. Tip number four is to always make sure your cake is cold or room temperature before decorating, unless stated otherwise in the recipe. I feel that's the little asterisk I feel I should put for every tip here. But when you see those articles on BuzzFeed or oh my god, what's the website? Cakerex.com. It's so much fun. I love that website. If you haven't seen it, I'll link it in the description box below. It's so funny, so funny. Oh my gosh, the kind of stuff that you see there. But a lot of that is when people try to decorate their cakes when they're so warm, and when you do that, the heat of the cake is going to melt the buttercream or the icing, whatever you're decorating the cake with, and it's just going to melt right off the cake, and it's not going to sit nicely, and you will feel awful because you put all this effort into baking the cake, and the cake is perfect, and why is it just sliding off? It'll be so frustrating. So make sure it's at room temperature. A handy way that I cool the cake quickly, especially when I'm filming and I don't feel waiting however long it'll take for them to cool, is I just pop the cake in the fridge or the freezer. Freezer's a little bit risky because you don't want to freeze the cake, but you don't want to do this every time, but if you're in a pinch, doing that will just bring the temperature down a lot quicker, and then you won't have to risk having your buttercream melted all over the place. If you are baking the cake the day before decorating it, or if you're baking in advance basically, you really want to make sure that you wrap the cake in some plastic wrap wrapping it very, very well. It'll make a huge difference wrapping it just like loosely in plastic wrap versus wrapping it in like 2 solid layers of plastic wrap, because if you give cake access to the air, that's a really weird way of putting it, but if you let air in, it's going to dry out the cake. So if you wrap it really, really well, the next day it'll taste just as fresh as the day that you made it. If you're making a cake and you want to stack the layers, make sure to slice the tops of the cakes off to create a flat surface. This is going to make it so much easier when you're stacking the cakes, and that's why I do that in every video. Not just because when you slice it, it looks nice and pretty because the layers are all equal. It's just, it'll save you such a headache because you won't be trying to like jam filling into like the awkward little like triangle gap that it'll create if you don't cut the tops off the cakes. So definitely do that. Definitely, yeah, like just save yourself the hassle of trying to stack cakes with a little like mound on top. Tip number 7 is if you find that your cakes are a little drier than you'd like, what you can do before you stack them, once you've sliced the tops off and everything like that, is you can get some sugar syrup, so just sugar and water, or microwave some jam until it's warm and liquid, and brush that onto the tops of the cakes, and that will add a lot more moisture. I'm sure you can hear Paddington, I'm sorry. Oh my gosh. That will add a lot more moisture to the cake, and yeah, it'll kind of like, it'll save you in terms of having a dry cake. And the jam will add like some flavor, so if you want to like make your cake a little more fancy, if you're doing a chocolate cake, you could use like raspberry jam, and that would taste so good. So good. Tip number 8 is making sure that you do a crumb coat of your cake. So what a crumb coat is a thin layer of buttercream that you like spread onto the cake before you pipe or decorate or apply the final pretty layer. And so what this little thin layer of icing does is it traps all the crumbs of the cake within that layer of ice cream. Within that layer of icing. And as unattractive as this looks, that's actually what you want. You want it to grab all those little bits of like cake and everything within that layer. And then after you do that, pop the cake in the fridge for about 20 minutes for the icing to stiffen. And then what that'll do is when you're spreading on the final like layer, like the nice pretty fluffy layer of icing on top. I'm so sorry, Paddington's like decided he's part of the video. When you're adding the final beautiful fluffy layer of buttercream, you won't have crumbs kind of like showing through because they'll all be trapped in that nice crumb coat. So if you have trouble icing cakes, use this trick and it'll save you so much, it'll save you a huge headache, I promise. Tip number 9 is if you're baking a cake or decorating a cake that has a lot of detail, or that it has like a nice little pattern on all sides, something that's going to make it so much easier for you is picking up a rotating cake stand. I didn't used to do this before, and my mom picked up one for me from Wilton, and it has changed my life, because you don't need to like walk around the table or somehow kind of try to shift the cake or something like that. It just allows the cake to nicely spin, and you can decorate all sides of the cake without having to like break your neck trying to like get in there and like find an awkward angle or something like that. It just makes things so much easier. Alright, and a last tip, tip number 10, is if you have decorated your cake and it's ready to go but you have to transport it somewhere, a handy little tip that my mom actually taught me is to get toothpicks and stick them into the outsides of the cake, but still have them like extend like an inch or so from the cake. Have them like stick them into the cake in like various little areas of the cake, any area of the cake that's like sticking out basically. And then once you do that, you can cover the cake in saran wrap, and the toothpicks are going to prevent the saran wrap from actually touching the surface of the cake. So the cake will still be protected, but it won't be like, the saran wrap won't be like touching the icing and like messing up all the hard work we just did. So yeah, so that is the video. I hope that these tips were helpful. If you have any other tips that I didn't mention, definitely leave them in the comment section below. I would love to know like what your tips are, what kind of tips you think of when you're making your cakes. And if this is your first time on my channel, hello, it is lovely to meet you. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the little notification bell if you like this video and you would like to see more. I upload every day from Monday to Friday, so if you like cooking, there is so much here for you. I've been doing this for 5 years, and like, there's so many recipes, so many. So yeah, if you want some recipe inspiration, please subscribe. We would love to have you, and I will see you guys tomorrow for another video. Bye!